car. Got the radio going. We're listening to K-Love. Let me turn it off. It just has me thinking about something. Yeah, and I just kind of want to talk about it for today's episode of Jesus for Mommies. So if you don't know, I started this new kind of series on my channel. It's something that I'm super passionate about. And I just really truly believe there are so many mommies on YouTube who, retreat to YouTube. They're tired, they're worn out, and they need to be met with the gospel. That is not where we necessarily need to be entertained. Entertainment is fun and awesome, but we really need to be met with something that will actually fuel our souls. And of course, that's Jesus. And so if you're here today, I hope this meets you and it fuels you and it gets you thinking about life-giving things and not necessarily, just shallow things. There's so many times where I get on YouTube and I watch another mom and I'm just like, man, I wish I was more rich, or I wish I was more pretty, or I wish, my life was different. And instead, when I come away from the gospel, I walk away, instead of saying, I wish, I walk away saying, yes, God is. God is enough. God is my richness. God is my life. God is my beauty. So anyway, let's get to the topic today. So I was listening to K-Love, and it had me thinking about how for so long I refused to listen to Christian music. And you're probably like, what? Your name is Faith. You're like a professing Christian making Christian videos on YouTube. And that's like where you start with Christian culture, is listening to Christian music, right? Well, not necessarily. See, I grew up in a nominally Christian home. And what I mean by the word nominally is it was kind of shallow. Like, we said we were Christians, but our life, when it really came down to it, didn't really actually look very different from everybody else's. And if I have a family member watching this video, I hope you were not offended by this, but rather you hear me in love. But yeah, we just things about our lives did not shout God's glory. And of course, it's like that always, because we are sinners. We're not always gonna be perfect. Anyway, I think you get what I'm saying. So anyway, we listen to Christian music all the time. And some days, most days, that was kind of all of the gospel we would hear. And so I grew up listening to Christian music all day long, every single day. My parents had us listening to Christian music, and we never listened to rap or country or anything else. It was just Christian music or classical. My parents, neither of them really went to church before they started having kids. They really wanted to go to church once they started having kids, and they wanted to raise their kids right. And so I really do think that they did church for us, and they did Christian music for us, of course, because they were trying to raise us right. However, I think, constantly listening to Christian music and not seeing the gospel actually lived out in their marriage or in the ways that they chose to parent us or whatever, which I'm not saying that they were horrible parents. Sorry, my window wipers are loud. I'm not saying that they were horrible parents by any means. They were wonderful parents, and they did, live out the gospel in some ways, but there was other ways. If you don't know, my parents are divorced, and things like that, where it could have been different. All of that to say, not to cast judgment on my family, but I do think it can be harmful to constantly, dogmatically just always Christian music, always Christian radio, because let's be honest, Christian radio is nominalized. I mean, you got such shallow songs sometimes. Like, how many of the songs actually say the name of Jesus? They may talk around it and talk about it and talk about, positivity and encouragement, but do they actually shout praise to Jesus? That's the point of music. That's the point of the Psalms, when David was shouting the praise of God. And so I would just say there's so often that Christian music, and even just the babble on Christian radio, can just be kind of, I'm gonna put my arm down because I'm getting tired, but I'm getting really worked up. I hope you can tell that I'm really passionate about this. But so often Christian radio and the talk Christian radio can actually be very worldly and not biblical. My husband, he has this funny story. He was listening to K-Love, and they were talking about something. It was something very basic to the gospel and to the Christian life, like why do you stay in marriage or whatever, and people were giving all this kind of worldly advice. People were calling in, saying this, saying that, and there was a few bad answers. And so the talk radio people would be like, okay, or whatever. But finally, it got to the end of the segment and they just ended it. And my husband was literally yelling at the radio. My husband's a pastor. I don't know if you know that. I'll link a few videos up above about that. But my husband was just yelling like, you never got to the answer. You never got to the answer that it's Jesus' love. Your job as a Christian radio station is to point us to Jesus' love. And you fail to do that in the most like critical moments. You know, those are just times like that where I get kind of bitter at Christian music, because I never want to just sit there and just be kind of like tootling along and listening to someone praising God and just be zoning out and to be not emotionally involved and to just be kind of what is the word, ambivalent to it, I guess, or not emotional about it. When I listen to the praise of my God, I want my heart and soul to be on the line. I want to join with that and mean it. And so I think that's the problem with just constantly listening to Christian music and dogmatically insisting, you know, I'm always going to listen to Christian music. The problem is that you then just kind of get used to it. You get desensitized to what you're actually singing along to, and you forget the meaning behind the words and the meaning of what you're singing. And so I would encourage you, if you're somebody that just kind of flips on the Christian radio station all the time, doesn't really think twice about it, I would encourage you, go over to the very worldly radio stations. And when you hear a song that is singing and praising ungodly actions, instead of, flipping it off and, running away and being ashamed that your ears heard such horrible things, enter into prayer. Enter into prayer for the others that are listening to that song and believing what the song means. Enter into prayer for that musician, and start praying for a revolution in the United States. I know this is probably you're stop being so dramatic, oh my gosh. But I'm being for real. Our kids, I think there's a fine line between our kids knowing what's normal and what's worldly, and to be aware of, we don't want our kids to not be socialized. I hope my son knows who Tim McGraw is one day, but I also hope he has heard his songs and knows why they're wrong. Not, oh no, we don't listen to country music because it's wrong and because it, exemplifies sex and alcoholism. No, I want him to know, yeah, we can listen to it sometimes because it gets us in the summer mood, or I love the sound, or I love the banjo, or whatever. But I do not believe what it says, because in this song, he says this, and that is against Romans 6, whatever, And in this song, he says this, and that is against a biblical ideal of marriage, or whatever. We need to be constantly, instead of rejecting the world's notions, we need to be in the world, but not of it. So we need to be in the world, interacting with the world, interacting with the songs, interacting with the media, and openly speaking against it, teaching our children, this is why this show is wrong. This is why we don't believe this. This is why we don't listen to this all the time. But if we're just only constantly consuming Christian media and Christian music, we actually end up failing to actually disciple our children. We fail to teach our kids the worldview that really truly exists, that the world is sinful and that the world is drenched in sin, and that we are the light in the world. Then your kids, go off to college or whatever, and they're shocked, overwhelmed, and they have a hard time finding north and south. And so I just would encourage you, I know this is super, I'm getting on a little questionable area. Some people are probably going to disagree with me on this, but I really encourage you to think twice. To think about how you can be more honest about the world with your kids, and not act like there's not sin that doesn't exist in the world, but be honest with them and say, you know what, this is why this is sinful. We're going to talk about what it would look like if your life actually meant you were drinking every weekend and sleeping with strangers or whatever. I don't know if you know this, but my husband and I do a lot of youth ministry. That's a lot of what our job and our life looks like. And I encourage parents and I encourage youth to always, always, always pursue open conversations with their parents in honesty about sexuality, about media, because we are in such a time of challenging politics, challenging worldviews, conflicting. And so I would just encourage you, if you're a parent of a teenager, if you're a parent of young kids that are forming their worldview or whatever, open up the opportunity to talk about things. That was one thing that I think my mom did that was so God honoring is that she was willing to tell me when I came home from school and I asked her, Mommy, somebody wrote on the bathroom stall a word that starts with an F. What does that mean? And she was able to define it, not as people use it like this, but actually this is what it literally means, and we don't use it because it, entails this kind of culture, because that's a potty mouth. Be able to normalize these things for our kids so that when they are educated by the world, they are not shocked or interested or enthralled or pulled into the lies of this world. And instead, they're already educated. It's already normalized. They understand the faults and the flaws in it, and they're able to make wise decisions. But how are kids supposed to make wise decisions if they're not educated first? You can tell them. This is where problems come if you decide to do that with your girlfriend. And our youth are starving to hear a godly description of how they're supposed to live in sexuality, how they're supposed to interact with the world. Am I supposed to listen to Christian music all the time? Am I supposed to, I don't know, never befriend anybody who ever has said a cuss word? Like, what is my life supposed to look like? And it is our responsibility to disciple the children and the youth of this world and be able to show them how to interact with this world and call out sin for what it is, instead of just ignoring it and letting it continue to fester in our own lives and hearts and the hearts of our children. We need to be able to call it out for what it is and speak truth, speak light into it instead of ignoring it. Anyway, I hope this has been encouraging to you. Just think twice. If you're always tuning on Christian music, maybe turn on something more secular and interact with the world and say, kids, did y'all hear that? They're talking about drinking beer. Mommy and Daddy don't do that. I wonder why. Let's talk, whatever. I don't know. You will know what is age appropriate for your kids. Okay, guys, I hope this has been encouraging. This hasn't been like super scripturally rich Jesus for Mommy time, but there will be more of those coming. I've had a few people ask about modesty and what I think about that. Comment down below if you have any video suggestions of things you'd like me to talk about in the next episode of Jesus for Mommies. But in the meantime, I'll just see y'all next time, and stay faithful. Love y'all. Bye.